Williams. I graduated from Wake Forest the first time in 2009. Also recently completed my master's degree in communication in 2016, where I studied institutional and systemic violence against Black women. And I've been working in diversity and inclusion at the university for about 6 years. I've also done um, some work for the Office of Personal and Career Development and am the program director for this initiative called the Leadership Project, where we're developing the leadership capabilities of students, faculty, and staff by sharing stories of prominent leaders from many different industries and sectors in society. Um, Bias can be structural. So when you think about the facilities in a workplace environment, so if I'm a trans person, for instance, and when I think about the restrooms that are available to employees, if I am a trans man or a trans woman, are there facilities that are gender neutral? Or what's the sort of policy or protocol for how I'm able to take care of myself? It also can be sort of show up in terms of representation. So who's represented in your leadership? Is it all male? Is it all female? Is it all white? And so for folks who hold different identities, from those particular groups, it can feel inaccessible. What about the workplace dynamics are creating this lack of diversity in your leadership? I think it can also show up in terms of the sort of images and representation on the walls. So, who are you lifting up as sort of ambassadors for your organization? What do those folks look like? What backgrounds do they represent? And are you promoting a dominant identity? Is there a diversity of identities represented in your representation in the workplace? It also can show up in terms of support services. So for women who, are pregnant and will eventually have a baby, or working parents, what sort of policies are in place to support them in that transition? Is there a generous maternity leave, or paternity leave? If folks, need to have flexibility in their work schedule to accommodate children, or if folks, who, have something that they would like to pursue outside of work. This is less about bias and more so just workplace culture. How accommodating are you to people who have various commitments within their lives, whether it be related to faith, um, you know, um, gender, race, it kind of runs the gamut. Yeah, I think um, one of the first things is just acknowledge your feelings and that you just experienced something. A lot of times we can invalidate it for ourselves, and we don't allow ourselves to really process it. It sort of happens and we move on. Um, so, in those moments, I would say first acknowledge that this is real, that you have been impacted by it, because that's important. Um, I would say, if you have an opportunity to mirror it back, sometimes these things can completely blindside us. And so what we're talking about when I say these things, I'm talking about microaggressions. So these are slights based off of your identity, whether they be race, gender, faith, sexual orientation, things about those salient parts of who you are that are being invalidated or undermined by someone who may be conscious or unconscious of it. And so when that happens, it can be incredibly um, sort of it just it can feel exclusive. You can feel like not seen, not heard, undervalued, uh, and so I would say the first thing is just acknowledge that those things happen, that you have experienced an incident of bias, how it makes you feel, but also mirror it back. So, did I just hear you say this? Um, because I think sometimes people are completely unaware of the things that they say. But describe the behavior, describe what you just heard, name it, repeat it back if you feel safe enough to do so. I would also say, it's important to to talk it out. And if there's a manager or person, a trusted source that you can go to, just to say, hey, this is what I just experienced. Um, I need to tell someone about it because I feel really bad right now, and I also want to do something about it. And I think if your workplace has some processes or protocols in place for you to make reports, at Wake Forest we have a bias incident reporting system. So when people encounter bias, they can actually funnel it through a system and it can be investigated. Some workplaces have those, many do not. So in those moments, I think it's important to find out what processes are in place in your particular organization to help you report and manage bias. Um, so I personally, I can think about some of the times I've been on the receiving end of bias. So um, I remember when I first started at one particular job, this was my first week in the role, and there was a supply closet, and I had been invited to go and get supplies as needed, post-it notes, staplers, paper clips, whatever it is you may need, just to sort of, orient yourself to the space and make sure that you're resourced appropriately. And so my first trip to the supply closet, I was actually called a thief. It's like, well, look, it looks like we have a thief in the building. And I think that the person who said it meant it in a joking way, but you know, on the receiving end of that, that's actually rooted in a history of um, stereotype and discrimination against black men. This idea of the black male being a criminal and needing to be surveilled because we are untrustworthy or maybe up to no good. And so a statement that for that person may have been, um, sort of innocuous, actually was really offensive. And so when it happened, I just found myself outraged because it's like, why did you feel the need to refer to me in that way in this particular moment? And so some of that is rooted in our own unconscious bias or stereotypes that we have deeply within us that we're projecting on other people. And so when that incident happened, I ended up going and circling back to the person and actually describing what happened, why, how it impacted me, and gave her an opportunity to actually explain what she meant. But also, it was a teachable moment. But I think for me, that's my orientation, given the work that I do. For others, we're not in the business of teaching people, about how to demonstrate dignity and respect. And so I think that, as much as folks can start to understand kind of where their biases and where their stereotypes lie, either through participating in workplace trainings, engaging in media or materials that give you a deeper understanding of discrimination in the workplace, or histories and cultures of other people that are different from you, traveling, just exposure to different cultures as a baseline foundation will help you in some interactions with people who are different from you. And unfortunately, for folks who are part of marginalized groups, you know, the frustration is in this sense of always having to teach and always having to educate people about your experience. And the reality is that's the exchange of cultures and sort of the education that's required in order for things to get better. So when I had my very first job at this PR agency, we just wrapped up an event and I was with my colleagues. I was the only person of color in this particular group. We were at a hotel, having drinks. So casual setting, basically, what folks in industry do. And we all were exchanging stories, and I was telling a particular story about a movie, Waiting to Exhale. And I talked about how that was a movie that I just remember my mom going to watch it. And, I said I want to preface it by first saying, I was raised by my mom. So this is a movie about black women. And just, having been raised by a black woman, there's content, media, things that may be directly, targeted at that particular population that I was exposed to. And so I make this comment, and this woman says, "Of course you were. You're black," as if all black people come from single parent homes. And so in that moment, a colleague, a white woman, actually steps in and says, "Hey, that's not okay." So to me, that's a great example of someone advocating and speaking up when they recognize that there's an incident of bias at play. And so I think that's one way that you can do it. What eventually happened is when we returned back to the workplace, the same woman actually reported the incident to HR, and there was an internal investigation. And so those are ways, I think, in which allies can really be advocates. I think for a person who's on the receiving end and you witness it, I think just sort of validating what happened, like, hey, I just heard that, or I just witnessed that. I just want to check in and see if you're okay, and if what I saw is what you experienced and what you felt, and we're sort of operating on the same page and can make some determinations about how we would like to move forward together. So those are some tips and strategies that I might recommend. So I've experienced it personally in having an ally step up. And I think just generally checking in is going to be really important for folks who want to be advocates or really speak up. And I think if you're part of a dominant group and you see someone from your identity perpetuating an incident of bias, I also think it's appropriate for you to step in and say, hey, I've been in conversations, hey, that's not okay, but I've been in conversations recently where I was with a male colleague and we were with women, and I noticed that he kept interrupting these women as, they began to share their personal stories. And I pulled him to the side and I was like, hey, brother to brother, like, you're gonna have to watch that. This is some behavior that I'm noticing consistently, and I don't think that it's okay. And I don't know if you're aware that you're doing it, but I just want to support you so you can be a better person, or a better support person to the women who we're working with.